My name's Matt Ganis. I'm from IBM. I'm actually from IBM.com. Before I go through, though, my slides, which I'm not going to get to all of them, are available at that URL if you want. Like I said, I won't go through them all. What I'm going to talk about are 3 different projects we had in IBM over the last 3 or 4 years, and how I modified the team going forward to finally arrive at our final configuration. So you might want some of that, you might not, I have no idea. It sort of fit well with the metrics, I think, because I look at metrics from a team perspective, not so much from a project perspective per se, but a little bit. So I'll skip all that. So who are we? I come from IBM.com. We're the ones responsible for the corporate portal. What I mean by corporate portal is www.ibm.com. That home page is ours. We're responsible for development, support, day-to-day operations of it, the whole thing. It's a very critical component to IBM. We're very proud of our 0% downtime over the last 7 years or so. This isn't an advertisement. I'm trying to say that it's merely a critical function. So whatever we do, we have to be careful not to jeopardize that downtime. Numbers have been touted like, I don't know, $50,000, $100,000 a minute in revenue we lose when we're down. So we can't afford any kind of downtime. We've been using Agile methods for about the last 4 or 5 years. We'll say we do XP. I'll say we do a hybrid of XP. Probably Scrum. We're becoming more and more Scrumish as we go along. I think that's just the nature of things. I think it's more a project management issue than it is how to do the development. We know how to do development. So what I'm here to talk about is this concept called the whole team. I'm sorry, am I earning your way? I move around a lot. I'm too nervous when I talk. The whole team concept is essentially saying that the people on your Agile team, you have every component you need there on that team present to complete your function. Now, I don't know about you. I come from a large organization, so it's hard to get my developers, my testers, my QA people, my deployment people, all those different functions that you have in one team room, one room. We were talking about this early on, and before we started, and somebody mentioned, how do you test? Right? I said, we can't do automated testing because we just couldn't get it to work. I said, in my company, I'll just go find 20 or 30 people and say, go test. Right? It's easy for me to do that. Right? So, in my organization or my company, it's sometimes hard to get this whole team concept together. But anyway, it's what we wanted to strive for. Right? And the problem with not having a whole team is you have this problem with information sharing. Right? If I don't have my deployment team there, they don't know what I'm building. If I don't have the testers there as part of testing throughout the iterations, they don't know what's trying to be developed because we haven't written a document to describe what it is we're going to test. Now, try taking a completed piece of code to a QA team and say, go test this, without having anything written down to say what it was you plan to deliver. It doesn't work very well. Right? It's kind of hard to pull story cards off a wall and say, this is what we thought we might do. They can't work very well in that environment. So really the question I had here, the research question I had here is it better to have one big large team or several independently working teams? So that's kind of where I started from. That's sort of the topic that I started from, where I started from. What I use, and when we get to metrics, is I'm using this thing called an XP evaluation framework. This is a really neat tool. And by the way, if you're looking for speaking topics, what I like to hear are experience reports. From the very first project to the most experienced project, I think is really valuable to hear because we all learn from each other. But the XP evaluation framework was an attempt by Laurie Williams and Bill Krebs and a bunch of people to actually put together a framework so I could compare your project to mine. Right? Kind of comparing apples to apples, because we all report on how we do things in different ways. So it's really hard to say, well, how many people did you have? And, well, gee, you had this kind of environment, a distributed environment or whatever. It's hard to compare them. So the XP evaluation framework attempts to make a consistent comparison across projects. Again, it's qualitative in some sense, but at least it gives you the common ground to understand if you compare one project to another one, which is why I liked it quite a bit. So I've used it here to evaluate, across these 3 different projects. So inside this framework, just so you know, the things I'll present, and like I said, I think I have like 40 slides here. I promise I won't take you through them all because they're repetitive. But in an evaluation, you basically have 3 different components to the evaluation. You look at the context, the adherence, and the outcome. Right? So context essentially says, gee, how big was your team? How experienced was your team? Did you have anything out of the ordinary that you had to worry about as you did this project? Adherence metrics is interesting in that it says, how agile are you being? Right? Are you adhering to pair programming, test-driven development, whatever those practices you're trying to do? How well are you adhering to those? To me, that's interesting because, again, what I want to look at is, as I had single teams or separate teams, if I adhered to the same practices, but I only expanded and made the team larger, did it make a difference, right? So it was kind of I used this sort of adherence metrics as a control mechanism to understand, did my changes take effect? And then finally, the outcome measures, right? How do you consistently measure outcomes across projects? What's your measure of success? Again, this is a thing I struggle with all the time. How do we measure success? Is your customer happy? Well, happy is a relative term, right? So it's really hard to measure, what a final outcome is. But again, it's an attempt to do it, an attempt to measure this. So project 1. Our first project, this is our first Agile project, was 4 or 5 years ago. I forget what it was now. Something we called 1X. We have weird names and stupid names. I don't like them. You'll see 1X, 2X later. It's really bad. But 1X essentially was we're taking our whole website and we wanted to redesign it completely. Okay. Now, that may not sound like much to you, but we run our corporate portal, or our websites, in 96 different languages. We see, on average, at the corporate portal, the main homepage, about 30 million hits a month. So we have a tremendous amount of traffic that comes through. So for us to make changes that widespread is quite challenging at times. So we were changing CSSs, page layouts, mastheads and footers. We had new applications coming in for navigation, called query-based navigation. Additional pieces coming in, such as other applications being added to the site, support for G9 countries, et cetera, et cetera. Fairly extensive amount of work. For our first Agile project, was kind of challenging. So context factors, our length was about 4 months for this project, to go off and change all that. The team essentially consisted of 4 Java developers, 2 XML, and 1 customer representative. Okay, that's key to mention because, again, I've got 2 sort of teams here, if you will. Nope. Design went along. Not my Agile team. No, not my Agile team. Again, I'm striving to build a wholer team, right? I really did start from a nugget. Believe it or not, we started like this, we went like this, and realized we need to do this. Is kind of the message here. We started with a decent-sized team, a couple functions. We changed later to a more condensed development-only function, realized that didn't work, and then expanded out to everybody. So team of 4 developers, couple XML developers. We were in a single location, which was good. Some of the team is remote. We are a worldwide team, but for the most part, my XML was all in one room. So we did have co-location. 0 Agile experience in this project. Okay, first project, first time trying it. 2-week iterations we stick to. For the last 4 years, we've stuck to 2-week iterations. And we haven't changed from that. And Java, XML kind of development. Adherence metrics, these are the charts I like to use when I look at my team to see, are they actually trying to be Agile, right? The spider charts. This comes out of the XP evaluation framework, right, to look at it. Essentially, I submit surveys to my team members, right, to say, do you think you're doing this, right? Are you doing this kind of stuff? So when I look at these charts, the first thing I look at is we weren't really doing retrospectives very well. And as I said early on, we weren't doing automated testing at all, right, if any. So I look here, working software, we are using a little bit of feedback, maybe not so much in retrospectives, but with customers, and we're doing okay in estimating. But overall, sort of team-wise functions, they seem to sort of fall in, right? We want this chart to sort of go around this whole spider diagram all the way around. So we're adhering somewhat, but not totally. Could have been a little bit better. So outcome measures, let's look at how we did here. We actually did quite well. The external function tests were problematic, right? When we went out to our end users and said, try this, we definitely had some issues there. Overall, the defect rate was 0. We actually did deliver 0 defect code, which is nice. All of our projects seem to deliver 0 defect code. And I will say, I don't know that that's so much because of Agile. I think it's more the culture that we have. The team does a whole lot of testing, but because we do, I said I can throw 20 people at it and say, go try it before we roll it out. There's a lot of pre-work, a lot of pre-testing that happens before it goes public. So we have a lot of people looking at it ahead of time. We really haven't shipped anything that's had anything of a Sev 1 or 2 type problem. CSS formatting issues sometimes, but very rare. Cycle time. The perception was actually quite nice, right? The customer said, look, we thought this was going to take you a year. You pulled it off in 4 months. So perception-wise, we actually did quite well. We were able to adjust fairly well to changes in requirements, challenging, of course, at time. Deploy and test were troublesome. Where I had a real big problem was with my deployment team. We're a development team, we're an architecture team, but the deployment is completely separate from us. So we didn't have them as part of our team to communicate with, caused huge problems, made us realize early on that we need to include them. Customer loyalty, right? Again, part of the framework measuring. Customer was extremely satisfied. As a matter of fact, they insisted from that point on that everything be done in an agile fashion. They actually liked it so much that the comments that came out from the retrospectives were, you need to do this all the time. Right, which was a good measure for us. We actually liked that one. Turned out to be quite nice. All right, so project 2. So we did great, right? That bad, huh? I'll keep trying. Project 2 is something we call incremental profiling. Incremental profiling is essentially, if you look at our website in certain places, I don't know how many people do, sometimes you'll see this little button that pops up, okay, that will say, add to my interest. I'm looking at rational software, and I say, I'm interested in that. Let me remember about it, so later on I can go look at it. So we did a few other things here, but for the most part, it was really this add to my interest called incremental profiling. 3 months worth of development time. Notice my team. No XML development, no design, none of that. It was a pure development team, right? What happened here is my development team changed. Right? 3 of the 4 developers left. The 2 XML team actually were left the company. So it ended up reforming the team here. They thought that, gee, there's one person on the team that has experience. We can do this agile stuff. Not a big deal. Let's just go off and build our little cocoon and go do this work. Still maintained 2 weeks of iteration length, Java, HTML. Notice things are pretty consistent, right? Other than the team. Right, the team is starting to change. That's why this framework is really nice. It allows me to compare disparate projects kind of against each other. Look at my adherence metrics. I'm going to do a comparison in a second, right? But if you remember, these were out further. I seem to have shrunk here. My whole team piece has shrunk. I've lost parts of my team. My Scrum meeting seems to have increased a little bit. Let me just sort of do it this way as a comparison. Right? My Scrum seems to have increased a little bit. People were able, because they were a single team, they were able to talk to each other a little bit more. The communication was a little bit easier to happen because I was a single team. But other pieces began to fall off. If you looked at the retrospectives, right? And by the way, I have all this retrospective data. It's like this thick, right, for all these projects. Estimation began to get worse. Right? The team realized that they couldn't estimate as well as they could have in the first project. Right? By the way, the customer stayed consistent. So the customer and architecture pieces were consistent. Developers were the only things that changed. Scrum meetings seemed to improve with a single team, which was good. There were major feelings. In the retrospective, there were lots of comments about feeling isolated. People don't know how we work. It would be much nicer if they knew or understood how the Agile process worked because we're having trouble getting our work done. So it was interesting to see that people felt isolated. Again, I like to compare my spider charts this way. It looks kind of confusing, but project 1 is sort of this yellowish color, and project 2 is the bluest. Notice I moved closer to the center, right? I moved away from my adherence metrics, right? I'm not being as agile as, the team wasn't as agile as they could have been, right? They seemed to move away. So that was somewhat problematic. If I look at the outcome measures, again, external function tests seemed to be problematic, 0 defects, which was good. Cycle time seemed to do okay. There was customer loyalty. Had a satisfied customer, but they weren't thrilled with the time it took to come to closure on problems. Right? So the customer was feeling problems. Right? Again, when I had a team that was isolated, just as development, they were concerned because key decisions weren't being made fast enough. So it was a problem for them here. Adoption was problematic. Deploy and test were fine, but adoption was problematic. On all these pages, we have to get our stakeholders to adopt that little button to put on the page. They didn't know what the button was. They didn't understand how the button worked. They weren't part of our team to understand what we were trying to build and develop. We thought we knew better, right? So, we see customer problems as well as team problems here. Some of the action plans that came out of the retrospective was, increase the team participation, increase participation in our planning games, right? Clearly the team's calling out for more and more work together with the external teams. So finally, project 3, our latest one. Another redesign of the IBM Com pages. Our first entry into Web 2.0 technology. So there's lots of client-server kind of interactions going on. Lots of dynamic page creations. Project length 4 months. I radically increased the team composition. Okay, so now I've got my Java developers, I've got my user design, notice I've got more customers than just one, right? I do 3 or 4 customers because I had separate project teams going on, all within the same Agile team, right? So lots of customer involvement, lots of stakeholder involvement, lots of design, lots of development. By the way, implicit in here is the architecture team, still not the deployment team, which is a problem. Team locations, predominantly single location, even though it was multiple, but we're in the same time zone. We're actually in the same state, but just different buildings in Upper Westchester. So for the most part, I'd call us co-located even though we weren't, close enough that we could see each other when we needed to. The Agile experience, I had inexperienced customers and user experience design, but still, inside the organization, the idea of Agile is fairly well understood at this point. Right? People understand how we work. They understand the vocabulary, as you mentioned before. By the way, one comment I wanted to make about the vocabulary. What I found to be very key, especially as my teams grow larger, the first thing I do is a glossary exercise. We actually define what we mean by things. I'll give you an example. In this, I started it here. In this add to my interests, where you either adopt, you deploy, you code but don't implement, right, or you don't adopt, right? All those things mean different things to people. So adopting might mean I put it on my page and it shows up. Deployed means I deployed the code but I've turned it off so it doesn't show up. Not adopted means I haven't put it on the page, right? So what do those things mean to everybody? It's very important that as your team grows larger, everybody understands what we mean by deploy, what we mean by adopt, what we mean by whatever those things are, because we all talk in different language. Adoption from my user experience team means something very different from my development team when a piece of code actually lands on a page. So I thought it was a great comment because I do that all the time. I found it very valuable. Yes?
If it's team that large, how do you manage your sprints in terms of the charts and story progress? I mean, do you have it on the wall? Is it software?
We actually run XPlanner. IBM is weird, right? We can't put things on walls, right? That's just, it's going to fall off a wall and the cleaning person's going to come and take it and they just get weird about that. So XPlanner works really well because I have it online. But it's also nice because, again, we're not all in the same location. To have them on a wall, we can actually go to a single system and pull stories out. So we manage everything through XPlanner right now. Right? XPlanner and Excel. A lot of times we'll export them into Excel and play around games with, manipulation of dates and things. Yeah. So my adherence metrics at the end of this one, let me actually skip this and actually, you can't see that at all, can you? Okay. So my previous project where I'll say I tanked from an Agile perspective. I didn't really tank, but it could have been better. Notice my spiders pushed out a little bit more, okay? What I'd hoped to show on this chart, and you can't see it here, right, is this is project 3, the blue is the project 2. I've sort of pushed out. Right? What I'd hope to see here is most of my Agile adherence would have stayed the same, and I would have only increased the whole team, increased the people on my team. But as a result of increasing the people on my team, I noticed that we got better in prioritization and estimation. So I guess it's an artifact of increasing the whole team or all the disciplines on the team. I start getting better at other stuff. You've read about the synergy of practices in XP or all this Agile stuff. I mean, to me, this is a perfect example of it, right? All I tried to do here was increase who was on my team, but by synergy, I ended up increasing my estimating and my prioritization.
And this is all based on a survey?
This is all survey. This is what the team feels they're doing, including the customer, the stakeholders, the team members, me as an architect, observing and watching the team, how we feel it's going. Yes?
Do you ever have anybody outside the team come in and check all these?
I haven't. I've had external coaches work with us, but not to come in and check. I do have a bit harder data, which I'll talk about in a second. Not harder, but a little bit. I try to get a little bit more quantitative than qualitative where I could. I had an extremely satisfied customer. Again, things seemed to stay the same. Adoption became much more widespread. Deploy and test became better. I said we still have problems with our deployment team, but thanks to Ali back here, right? She actually did some work with our deployment team, and what they did was, I couldn't make them agile, or she couldn't make them agile, but what she did, which was great for us, was she made them commit to every week we could have a deployment slot, right? So whether I used it or not was up to the team, as long as we told them a week or two ahead of time. So they were ready for us. If all I have to do is say, hey, in 2 weeks I need to deploy, I know the time's allocated. I don't have to go through a long, rigorous process with them. It's a lot easier to get into a deployment cycle. That alone helped us in this particular project to deploy easier and faster, right? But again, they're still not part of our Agile team, which I'd like to fix. But let me talk about some of the metrics, and I promise these are my last 2 slides. I tried to go through them as quick as I could. What I tried to do is look at how much better did we become. And I didn't really have a good metric to measure it, so I actually used function points. Now, what I did with the function points is I looked at all of the projects, and I looked at what we wanted to deliver in terms of function and what we actually delivered, because some of the problem with function points is, and Agile is, you don't always deliver what you think you're going to deliver because you've let functions drop out or features drop out. So I played some games, and I had to look at what we wanted to do and what we actually delivered. In project 1, I had about 188 function points that were to be delivered in that project, and we ended up, by estimation, delivering about 162 for about an 86%, I don't know what you want to call it, accuracy rating or efficiency rating. But project 2, which was interesting, when I looked at it, I had 144 function points, a less complex project, if you want to use that number as a measure of how complex a project is, and only delivered about 94, about 65%. Okay? So as I shrunk the team, I seemed to become less efficient, at least so I thought. Follow-on project 3, I looked at it, which was a much more complex project, 211 function points. We ended up delivering about 200 of those. We actually did quite well for a 94% efficiency rating, if you believe in function points. So it appears, at least on the surface, that by increasing my team size and getting more and more disciplines on my team, I actually become more efficient over time.
Sorry, when do you break? Like on the different projects, when do you know when to stop and you can make a function because of deadline?
Because of my deadline. The way we work is I'm told you will deliver June 1st. Okay? That's the date that we're going to launch, and they'll take it to the senior vice presidents, and that's when they know we launch. And by the way, the problem we have is we have the corporate portal, but then we have all these other sites around us that are dependent upon us. So we have to tell them when we'll launch because they'll need new CSSs and HTML designs, etc. So I have to work to a fixed date. I have no choice. So yeah, we have a fixed date, and actually if it's June 1st, I'll probably stop May-ish to allow them a month for their own integration work, right, of our HTML and their own testing because they're not an Agile team yet. So really my end date is about May sometime. So I do know clearly when I'm going to stop. Right? I clearly do know how much of a given function I didn't complete. I do know my stories, but I wasn't sure that stories made a good metric. Although I'd probably get argument here.
What's your definition of function point?
So I actually used Albrecht's function point mechanism, right? That had the criteria for the small, medium, large, and then the 15 evaluation criteria across.
Based on
Functions, high-level functions. So,
features, right?
yes. Well, define technical features.
So as opposed to a user story or something a requirement came directly from the business, you were looking at system.
I looked at function, what the function that was supposed to be delivered at a very high level, the function to be delivered. The function to be delivered is a dynamic masthead that has a greeting service in it that says, welcome back, Matt. That's a function, right? Dynamic one that had in the bottom page tools that provided some tools that could be dynamically changed, a function. Each of those probably had 15 or 20 stories associated with it, but it didn't make sense to look at it because stories fall in and out of priorities as you go along. So I didn't want to use that.
What about things that the users of the website don't see, like, let's say, auditing or, let's say, some kind of site metrics that are not
A lot of, well, if I did have a site metric one, I would have counted it as a function point because that is a function to us that we had to deliver. Didn't really, I shouldn't say it didn't matter that the customer didn't see it. It didn't matter to me because it was something I had to deliver as part of that project. And it was done in an Agile fashion, so I wanted to know, was I consistent or not? So, all right, so this was at least some qualitative data. I then took it one step further, and I went back and I looked at all our retrospectives. And I went through all the retrospectives, and I tried to classify the comments in the retrospectives to look at it, and I looked at team-related comments. Our team stunk. We did well. right? Tom did a great job, or whatever it was. Positive team-related comments, and negative, as well as customer-related, right? I didn't like the fact that I didn't understand X wasn't being delivered as a customer, right? Or I thought the team did a great job in my changing requirements, whatever they were. For both project 1, 2, and 3. So I tried to analyze all the retrospective results. And what I found was interesting. It was a consistent trend. In the first project, the team didn't seem to be as positive as I would have expected. It's not a huge difference, but it wasn't a positive experience overall for the first Agile team. They were learning. They didn't understand. They were getting beat up by management. But the customer was happy. They were getting things delivered. Give me just 2 minutes. Customer was very happy because things were delivered on time. They insisted that we stick with Agile methods from now on. Project 2, both are down. Team wasn't happy. Customer wasn't happy. Clearly the customer wasn't happy. 17% unsatisfactory in the retrospective. But when you look at project 3, the radical change, it actually switched. I didn't make the numbers up, right? They actually switched from 17 to 7%. They switched around. So clearly, as I expanded my team, I see a much positive team atmosphere, much more positive team atmosphere, as well as customer atmosphere. So my conclusions, right? Customer satisfaction increased, team satisfaction increased, our productivity seemed to increase. I don't know what else to say other than we're going to continue to expand our whole team, right? We're going to continue to add more and more functions to that team. What else? Yeah, other than we need to get better at the deployment methodology, right? How do we actually get those deployment teams better synchronized with us? So that's the first time I did 30 slides in 30 minutes, but I tried. So really, if you have any questions, or you want the slides, or you want to talk more about it, please let me know. I'd be more than happy.
Yes, thank you, Max.
Thanks.